It's great to see some new people and some familiar faces as well. For those of you who might not be familiar with Social Art Network, it is in essence a mutual aid group for practitioners interested in social engagement and social justice across the UK. I'm really excited to talk about the F word. This is a really going to be an interesting and powerful session. I'm just going to preface that with all of our meetups, this is not a conference or a symposium, and there are no experts or non-experts. We all come with our lived experience, and we are all experts in the room. And what there are guests to offer us provocations to think about. Funding is something that is worth untangling for us as producers of culture. And I met Gemma through work trying to create resources and learning around crowdfunding, which we've done through Social Art Network, partnership with Kickstarter, and produced some documents around that, which we have as resources on the website. The idea is that eventually over, X period of future time, we build all sorts of different learning resources around funding that are co-made and they're co-built and we all feed into. So it's a bit of an experiment in thinking about what open shared documents are and how multiple people can be feeding into shared documents. Daniela will talk a little bit later about how we're going to be doing that this session. But you'll see there on the website, there's the beginnings of what we hope is future learning around the topic. Really looking forward to it. Thanks, Jenna.
Great, thank you. Let's just do like a quick bit of housekeeping, although I feel like we're probably all Zoom experts now, but I have my view on gallery view so I can see you all. You might like to do the same, although John will be spotlighting the different speakers. I've got the chat box up as well. I know people are starting to kind of share ideas and resources, so feel free to use that. And I'm a big fan of reactions, because sometimes, sometimes it says what we need to say. So if you're having a really great time, you can just let us know by giving a round of applause or anything like that. So yeah, we'll use Zoom in these different ways to communicate this evening. Yeah, so inside and outside, artists as funders and commissioners of creative work. That is our subject. Oh, nice thumbs up already, good. It's a really broad subject, like Marcelo says, and it's something that I'm really looking forward to untangling a bit. Creativity and funding and how the two things fit together. I'm kind of have it in my head as three different areas that I'd love to explore with you all this evening. The first is about artists who work in the arts as funders and fundraisers and project managers, recruiters and commissioners, how they navigate the responsibility of supporting fellow artists. That's kind of one area. Another is how artists have been influenced by the business side of arts. I wonder whether project management can be an art form, whether bureaucracy is ever beautiful. Can it be beautiful? Can team meetings be sites for creative investigation? How might we approach application forms as creative projects? All of that kind of thing. And then the third area is really about the pandemic and has it democratized the way that artists are engaging and connecting with arts organisations and funders? We all exist now in our lovely rectangles, our Zoom-shaped worlds. We have to speak and listen to each other in different ways now, and I wonder if that has done anything to shift the power dynamics between artists and funders. So they're the kind of three areas that I'd love to have a look at and think about with you all this evening. I have invited 4 brilliant speakers along this evening to share their thoughts on how creativity and funding are linked. I've asked them all to present for 5 minutes this evening about their personal and professional experience of working in the arts and as a creative practitioner. I'm just going to do some introductions briefly, so they will all be spotlighted. So it is a bit like a game show on Zoom, isn't it? So you'll be spotlighted just for a moment as I kind of just introduce them in the order that they'll speak tonight. So first up is Debbie Adele Cooper. And Debbie is an artist who has shown her work internationally. as a curator. She currently works for Format International Photography Festival. She runs the Digital Artist Training Programme for Quad and is the manager of the Photographic Collections Network. Welcome, Debbie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Next up is Jacqueline Crooks. Jacqueline is a writer. She was shortlisted for the BBC National Short Story Award, and her short story collection came out a couple of years ago. She also delivers writing workshops to socially excluded communities and has worked in the third sector for 25 years. She is director of her own consultancy, Sharpraiser, offering fundraising and business development advice for charities, community groups and artists. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Hello, everybody.
Our third presenter is Andrew Ellaby, who is Senior Manager for Combined Arts at Arts Council England, and has worked all across the country for Arts Council and across different art forms as well. And he is also the creative producer of the amazing And What Pan-London Queer Arts Festival, the first of its kind. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. I'm hoping to win the caravan in Cuddly Toy.
Yeah. Wonderful, thanks for coming along tonight. And Sarah Philp is Director of Programme and Policy at Art Fund, which is the national fundraising charity for art. She's a founding member of the Association of Women in Arts and has been a mentor for Arts Emergency, amongst lots of other wonderful things. So welcome, Sarah, for coming along this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm just going to, at this point, pass over to Daniela briefly, just for some other admin and the Safer Spaces agreement.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Gemma. So I will be the co-host for today's event on Zoom. So if you have any question about the format or technical issues, you can get in touch privately using the chat. I'm also going to be sharing some documents there, so just keep an eye throughout the event. And also I will be sharing some information about how to access the breakout rooms or put forward the question. Also, I will be put some documents like the Safer Spaces Agreement and online participation guidelines. This is for anyone who didn't have a chance to read it yet, and they're very important because it's in order to keep our events a safe space for everyone. So please make sure you read it and agree to that before we start tonight. And yeah, that's it. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Oh, mute. Great, thank you so much, Daniela. Yeah, I just wanted to preface, kind of before we move into the presentations, just to echo what Marcelo said really at the beginning. I guess this isn't a space about how to access arts funding and kind of thinking about the processes necessarily. There's lots of other events which kind of are how-to guides. Really, me and all the other speakers, we're here not necessarily to represent the organisations we all work for or have worked with, but really just as people who work in the arts sector who I think have a really interesting perspective on arts funding that I think is valuable to hear. And we're all here together just as people who care about creativity and how it connects and supports others. So that's just to frame our conversation. So the format is presentations followed by a Q&A of about 15 minutes for questions and answers after the presentations. Then we will say thank you and farewell to our YouTube audiences and move into kind of a group discussion with the people here in the Zoom room. We put into small breakout groups to reflect on and maybe debate anything that's come up this evening. And then I'll bring everybody back to conclude the event together. Great. So I wanted to just introduce myself and say something about my own experiences to offer some context for the presentations and discussions and really, explain why I wanted to put together this event. And why I want to put together. So I have always written, I've always made creative projects from a child. I was always making things, making little books and all kinds of things. As an adult, I make virtual reality scripts, I perform, I write books, I collaborate a lot with other artists and dancers. I co-create poetry projects with older adults, and I run Write and Shine, an early morning programme of creative writing workshops and events. So I get up very early and write and share work. So this is not a natural time for me, but I'm still loving it. So mornings are kind of my best space. And that creative work is what I see as my main work. But alongside that, for 15 years or so, I've had full-time employment working for charities and in arts funding. I've had some kind of office job since I was around 16. I've worked in call centres, a very weird electronics company for a while, a van hire firm, publishing, arts organisations, and then I moved into arts funding and worked at the Arts Council for about 9 years. And most recently, I was the UK lead for Kickstarter, where I worked with the Social Art Network in that role. And I really like offices. I miss offices. I miss that chance to kind of grab a coffee in the morning and march up the road into the building and beat my card on the show it to the receptionist or beep it when I enter the building. I like having a desk and I like having drawers and a stapler. I miss my stapler. I liked in-trays when in-trays were a thing. I like looking how other people colour-coded their calendars, always one of my favourite things. People trying to organise their time. I like photocopying and patting the paper into like neat piles. I like lunches and drinks and good conversations about creative things with my colleagues. But in particularly long drawn out meetings in the office, when the meetings were overrunning and I was hungry and maybe I was angry at some decisions being made, or maybe the company I was working for did not always match my own values, I would pretend to myself that I was not in fact an office worker like everybody else around me. I was in fact the first writer in residence of that company, and I was there. I just would drift into a daydream. I'd think that my role was not just about doing the job, but also experiencing it and observing it and writing about it. And I had in mind a quote from one of my favourite poets, Rita Dove, which is, "Without imagination, we can go nowhere. And nothing is too small, nothing is too ordinary or insignificant. These are the measure of our days. These are the things that sustain us. And they're the things that can be worthy of poetry." So I would have that in my head. And then I'd also have another quote from Gloria Steinem about the social justice movement. And she always says you needed people on the outside shouting in the streets and people on the inside in government and institutions making stuff happen. So I had those two quotes in my mind, and that helped me remember why I was doing the work I was doing and why it mattered. I was an artist and I was trained as a coach, and I knew that I could offer something good to the artists I was working alongside. But in May this year, I left my job at Kickstarter to focus on my creative work. Write and Shine, the programme was going really well. I had a manuscript accepted to a publisher. I took voluntary redundancy and decided to leave full-time employment. It's led me into, it's a right move for me. Even in a pandemic, it was the right move for me, and it's led me into a really reflective space, wondering what it has meant to always be juggling so many different roles that I know a lot of us here will know well. What it's mean to be being a creative alongside the other work I was doing. So I was very glad when San invited me to host this event. I'm still working a lot with artists, but in a new way, and like I say, I'm in quite a reflective space about it. So just some thoughts to offer, just to conclude my introduction here. I believe it really deeply matters to have artists in arts organisations. I really think it matters. I personally have been able to influence policy and processes, and I know my peers have as well, by coming at it as an artist, as a practising artist. There's some small examples, like I was part of the group that set up Developing Your Creative Practice at the Arts Council, part of the group that kind of started formulating some ideas around that, and things about it being a short application form and for R&D. Like I was passionate about, kind of really hope I played a role in pushing that forward. I've always felt the weight of knowledge, if you're in an institution or if you know about fundraising and in the arts, I've always felt that knowledge to be both a gift and a burden. I've always believed it vital to share what you know, and if you have some information, you're being able to pass it on to peers. I know I've seen artists thrive because of ideas I've helped them with or connections that I've helped them make. But it can be really emotionally draining and difficult and exhausting work. I feel I've been resented and liked in equal measure. I've made mistakes whilst trying my hardest to make really great things happen, and that can be really hard and challenging to hold. And the final thought I have on it is I'm very interested in how it might have affected my creative work. I work a lot in creative restraints and have collaborated across different art forms. So, for example, one of my first books, Speak to Strangers, was 100-word short stories written in the moments between work. And the morning projects I do sort of fit in amongst a working day. And in my new collection, there's a lot of stories that are set in offices, and one is on Zoom. Yes, it is. So, you know, it's made me think about actually the influence, how these things, how there's a synergy between the work I do, or the work we do, and the creative work we produce. So that is where I land with this question, the relationship between creativity and funding. And where I see the value of this session is really about supporting each other to think clearly about the work that we do and why we do it. I think the relationship between arts and artists and money is important and complex and fraught. It's challenging right now at this moment in time. So I love that we have the opportunity to bring our creative minds to the theme of funding today, and just be curious and reflective on the issues that come up today. So without further ado, I would love to move to our first speaker to kind of respond to this idea about creativity and funding. So Debbie, I'm going to pass over to you.
Marvellous, that's me. I should just move on to my presentation. Excuse me for a sort of technical moment. Hopefully that's working. Yes, I think so, marvellous. Also starting my timer, so it keeps time. So hello, thank you for asking me to talk today, Gemma, I really appreciate it. My name's Debbie Cooper, or as you'll see, Debbie Adele Cooper, which is my artist name because there's too many Debbie Coopers on the internet by far. I am an artist, producer, curator, fundraiser, manager, and probably some other things that I forgot to mention. My current jobs, I manage the Photographic Collections Network, which is a subject specialist network. I'm a producer for Format International Photography Festival. I'm also digital artist development curator at Quad, which enables me to work with lots of artists to bring technology into their practice for the first time. And I've supported lots of artists through their first funding bid, which brings me no end of joy. I also do a ton of freelance art projects. Previously, I've been head of fundraising at Museum Sheffield, associate artist, Nottingham Contemporary. I've worked in lots of museums and galleries. I love museums and galleries. So as an artist and curator, my work is normally large, not always, and difficult to make. I have a lot of photographs in it. I do a lot of work about mixing photography and sculpture and the space in between and how that meets. Also, my work's really slow. It takes me about 2 years to put a project, idea, fundraise, make it happen. So I need other things to be doing to keep things ticking over while I'm actually making work slowly. This is a piece I made in 2015, which went on to tour in China later. Here's some work I made at Buxton Museum, which also had iBeacons in it, because I'm interested in how sound is played and how people interact with that in space. This is some work at Nottingham Contemporary, again, photography and sculpture. It's what I love. I did this with schools as well, so I love doing workshops. I do miss doing workshops throughout this quarantine period. This is a permanent work that I've made for St Helens Council, which is the biggest work I've made to date, which needed a lorry to take it, which I never want to have to do something like that big again. It was over 2 tons. This was a mixture of photographs that were from the archive and photographs I made. It was funded by the Heritage Lottery, and I did worked with 4,000 people as part of this project, which was exhausting. Yeah, it's rather large work. And a very wobbly video, I do apologise. As a curator, I fundraise for projects. This is a show I co-curated with Derby Museums, which was from an archive that I'd worked with as an artist. I realised when I was an artist in residence for them that it wasn't enough. They needed actual proper fundraising to make an archive. And as a long story short, we did an exhibition as part of that. Because I'm interested in socially engaged practice, that's where my heart lives. The second space at the gallery was all about plotting where studios are and having research days, and you could be your own Victorian selfie, which was lots of fun. I've done lots of public engagement. A few years ago, I was artist in residence for Dartmoor Prison, which was a life-changing project. It's, yeah, it changed me more than I thought it would. It was a very interesting place to work. I took in diaries that were written 100 years ago into the prison and read them to the prisoners, and we made audio recordings together in response. And it gave the prisoners something to be proud of, a history that they could connect to in their prison, which was really rewarding, but also incredibly challenging project. And I also made photographs, because I always make photographs. Here's part of the St Helens project, we're making cyanotypes in care homes, which was just lovely. I had a really great time working with these lovely ladies. I also do lots of crowdsourced projects. So I do mass participation. This is one I wrote for Format quite a few years ago. I asked people to upload their own photographs to the internet back when that was quite groundbreaking. And you could print them out in the space and make your own exhibition. So the exhibition was created by the people that came into the space. This has gone on to be shown at lots of other galleries to do their own iterations of it. And I've also done it at Tate Britain. And it was featured on Sky Arts, which was very nice. Fundraising. I love fundraising. I see it as a creative act. I am trying to convince another person at the other end of the form that I've got an amazing idea. But the very first funding bid I ever wrote was when I was homeless. So I was homeless for a while back in 2000 when the housing crisis really hit. I was a homeless single parent, and I went to Citizens Advice, and they showed me how I could write a funding bid and get some furniture. And I was like, oh, I can get help. This is amazing. And then I went on to Grants for Individuals, which used to be a big book form at the old local library. And I applied for funding to get some GCSEs and some A-levels, and eventually go and do my degree. I've had lots of funding from the Arts Council. Thank you very much, guys. Artists International Development Fund was great. That enabled me to take my first work abroad, which has made a huge impact on my practice. And here it is being installed in China with some wonderful people. And it somehow got retranslated to Ancient Portraits of Vegetables, which wasn't the name of the title of the UK, but hey, things happen. This is the bid I wrote for Winters, which I'm so proud of, because it took an amazing archive that is the oldest photo studio in the world, and it's made their collection accessible by the public, which is one of the highlights of my life and my career, I think, and it's now an actual trust of their own. Yeah, funding bids make so much difference. Allows you to work with the people, the public, make things happen. And I really do see it as a creative tool. This is Past Lives projects that I fundraised for and managed, which digitised cine film and photographs and then made them into performances. So yeah, that's a whistle-stop tour of some of my works. And here's some of my many contact details.
Great. Oh, thanks so much, Debbie. It's so interesting to think that you've made slow work and big work, and I wonder how that is kind of connected to the work you're doing with other organisations. I wonder kind of the impact and how those two things fit together. Anyway,
yeah, I've not thought about it before you asked me for this, of how they all interlay. Also, as a young parent, I was always trying to find us enough jobs to also make ends meet. So I think part of my career was just this constant piecemealing of freelance work to enable enough work to happen. But it has meant that I've got to do some really exciting projects. And now I get offered exciting projects, which always just blow me away and are really exciting to do. I think, yeah, really great position. But I do love fundraising. I find the start of a project, that when all the ideas are flowing and you can help craft it into something, that's the real buzz. Making it happen, the project management, that's the hard work, in my point of view.
That's great. So the excitement of a funding bid. Good. Okay, well, that moves us very swiftly and neatly onto our next speaker, who is Jacqueline. So over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Gemma. I'll just get set up. So I I'm a fundraiser. I've been a fundraiser for 25 years. In that time, 25 years working in the charity sector, working with various charities. So I don't advise or administrate arts funding for funding bodies. I tend to work, I see myself as working outside of funding bodies and cultural institutions. I'm a writer, I'm a creative writer. So I see myself as working from margins, where I've always been and where I'm most comfortable. I primarily work with small grassroots charities. Most of them are BME charities, refugee charities, Caribbean elders charities, or sometimes, but not exclusively. I work with older people's charities and lots of young people charities. So I do target grassroots charities. I see myself as coming from the grassroots, and that's where I'm most comfortable. I'm therefore not in a good position to make the processes of funding bodies more open and inclusive. My screen is frozen, just bear with me. So I see that working from the margins puts me in a really fantastic position to develop and raise funding for the kinds of projects that I'm interested in as a writer, but also as someone working for community benefit. For example, I worked with Caribbean Elders Charity, helping them to tell their life stories, and it was a real pleasure for me to raise funding for that project and then to deliver it, but also to work with some other artists in the delivery of that project. So in my work, I'm currently a charity consultant. I help charities to raise funding for arts projects. And in doing that, I do create work for lots of artists. So for example, with the funding I raised for the Caribbean Elders charity, I was able to raise funding for myself to deliver workshops, but also for some visual artists, for some musicians. So I think the value of the work I do is in connecting artists across different disciplines. And introducing them to charities and other community groups for long-lasting relationships where artists can drive creativity in the charity sector, really working with those small socially excluded groups, driving innovation with their art. So I think those kinds of relationships benefit both the charities and the artists. Artists are getting work and charities are getting really sort of increased profiles because of the artists, because of the work of the artists, and they're creating tangible things that they can help to showcase the impact of their work, such as anthologies of creative writing or albums of music. So I tend to prioritize unknown artists when I'm raising funding, artists who need a platform and are doing something unusual and unique. So I see it as, because I work on the margins myself, I really am more interested in artists who see themselves in that way as well. I think that supporting other artists is a way of supporting yourself. I really enjoy collaborating on joint projects with artists, working with them on funding bids. So a lot of artists are new to fundraising, so I really enjoy sharing my skills because I learned something from them that can strengthen the funding bid. So I think working in partnership is key really to fundraising and driving projects. It's a way of sharing knowledge, but also widening opportunities. So I see the business aspect of these projects, project management, project development as an art form. And I always look at the business side of projects, art projects for community groups and charities. I look at it with a creative lens. I think to me, business is an art. So for me, funding bids are like writing short stories. I write short stories and I bring that to the funding bids. If I'm telling a story in that bid, then funders are going to really engage with it. But I also think that if I bring my art form to the whole process, it makes it more interesting. What can be a dull and dry subject matter, for me, it makes it more interesting. I very much use my art to create these projects. So I'm a writer, so I tend to create projects around literature, currently delivering creative writing workshops for young women who are leaving care and are moving into independent or semi-independent living. So that's a way of me connecting my art form to social welfare. But again, I'm working with a range of artists, musicians and dancers on that project. So I think for me, there's definitely a connection between art and business. So that's my talk. Really lovely to meet you all.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Oh, there's so much in there, both of those presentations. I love that an application form can be a short story. Yeah, I totally love it. And I like that kind of both of you are, you know, just demonstrating that you approach your work with such generosity. It isn't about what you're getting out of it necessarily. It's about kind of how you're supporting others, but then that comes full circle and kind of feeds you creatively, and then you kind of putting more out. So it's a really nice impression I'm getting from both of you just about the cycle of why you're doing that work. Lovely, thank you. Now we're going to move to Andrew. Andrew, your turn to present.
I'm going to try and do a lot of things that I've never done before. So if anything goes wrong, I apologize in advance. Firstly, I'm going to try and play a video, and after that one, I will play another video and another video. And if they don't play, I'll just stop them. So Gemma, just wave at me if they're not working, and you'll have to look at my face instead of the videos. Let's see. So share screen, play that, and then share. So far, so good. Is there sound?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't want that, so I'll take it off. Okay. Hopefully you can't hear the sound. Okay, we'll go with that. So when Gemma asked me to do this, well, during lockdown, I've been thinking a lot in general about therapy and support groups like AA, which I'm terming as Artists Anonymous in terms of this talk. So I apologize if this sounds self-indulgent, because I originally wrote it as if I was sat on a therapist's couch. It's scripted, and I don't normally do scripted talks. So if it sounds scripted, that is why. I'm an artist. I'm a curator. I'm an arts facilitator, workshop leader, a critic, and a creative producer. At the age of 34, I founded my own arts producing company in 2015 and launched a festival in 2016. I guess you could say I have a portfolio arts career, but I have a confession to make, a very dirty secret. I also work for Arts Council England, and I have done for 11 years. I want to start with a spoiler. I worry I haven't answered so much. I worry I haven't so much as answered, well, any of the questions posed in the brief, directly at least. I've taken a slightly different tack and wanted to give you an idea of my own lived experience of being an artist, an employee within an arts institution, and then being both. You probably can't imagine the amount of times in my creative career I've had to come out. And I don't mean like when I awkwardly told my mum I was gay before jumping on a train, leaving her on a platform at Darlington Station as I sped back to my adopted university home of Manchester. I know. I mean the more complicated type of coming out and telling your artistic peers, partners, venues, and artists that you work for the institution, an institution that you never quite know how people will respond to. I'm going to pop another video on. I wish I'd organized this more smoothly. Let's see. Okay, sorry about the jumping in and out of videos and faces. You never know how people will respond to. To put this into context, when I go to especially when I have my name on one side and Arts Council England and my job title on the other, It's not so easy for me to get away with this anymore as it used to be, but for a while it really worked. I was able to chat to somebody first without the joy / anger / suspicion that the ACE brand can bring with it in those situations. And don't get me wrong, I love working for ACE and I love talking to people about their projects and experiences, but sometimes it's nice to be incognito before you assess if you're a friend or foe. Luckily, in some ways, I was an artist first. I've never worked in the sector before working for Arts Council, and since working there, I've always found it reassuring that artists, creatives and organisations that I work alongside with on a day-to-day basis, that I understand their journey from both sides of the wall. It's not that I'm suggesting I have a superpower, and actually there are handfuls of creatives that work within the Arts Council. But I think it really helps to understand what it actually feels like to have an unsuccessful application, or to see a project break down in front of you, or to sell out a performance in under an hour, or to say it, yes, struggle with Grantian. Have to get it in there once, sorry. I will do another video in a bit. Maybe it's useful to put some flesh on the bones. I studied art for as many years as I've been at Arts Council. I did a foundation in BA Photography and MA in Fine Art. I was very focused on being an artist. I had quite a solitary studio practice and made very introspective work that addressed repetition through the medium of performance and video. Again, I know it's very of the time. Upon graduating, I moved to Spain and took on a management job. I moved back home after a few years to work in management at Ticketmaster, I know again. And after about 12 months, realised I was desperate to do something with my degree. So I took a financial step backwards and a heartfelt step forwards and applied to Arts Council. I started as a manager in the inquiries team, customer services, an assessor for visual arts in the Grants for Arts team, which is now Project Grants, then in the dance team as a senior assessor for combined arts. And after this, I applied to move to London and was a relationship manager for combined arts, and finally to where I am today as senior manager for combined arts and environmental responsibility. That's a lot of Arts Council language. I apologise reading that back, it was quite a lot. Why am I telling you this? I guess I'm trying to explore the idea that being an artist, okay, maybe a failed or struggling artist at the first time round, led me into management, which led me into Arts Council, and in turn, working at Arts Council eventually led me back into wanting to be an artist. This is where I'm going to try and put another video on again. Sorry. This one. Sure, there's a much more eloquent way to do videos and not take up so much of everybody's precious time. Okay. So yes, led me eventually into wanting to be an artist again. By 2015, when I launched And What Art, my perception of being what I thought it was to be an artist had completely changed. Oh, press play. I was no longer thinking in a visual arts language and wanted to bring what I knew into a collaborative, participatory and politically driven practice. From 2015 to 18, we presented Proud Interventions, which is the first video you saw, a Pride project working with local communities to re-remember Pride as a movement of arts and activism through performance, costume and dance. Without working in combined arts, I would never have known or thought to approach it this way. In 2016, I created And What Queer Arts Festival, now in its 4th edition. It launched on the 13th of March 2020, which, if you remember dates, was 2 days before lockdown started. So we did 2 events of 26, kind of heartbreaking, but the process of unproducing was interesting in itself. My practice here translates similarly to Proud Interventions. I create an idea or context and then curate artists and producers around it to develop something greater than the sum of its parts. Over 4 editions, including 2020, And What has now given space to well over 600 artists to show, develop and platform their work. Off the back of this, it led me into working with some of my American drag idols, including Peaches Christ, Coco Crew and the Boulay Brothers, who I all toured extensively across the UK, mostly for the love of it. And most recently, for And What, I've begun to commission new works specific for the festival. So the second video you saw was a commission that I worked on with a Berlin-based choreographer and an open call of dance performers from London, queer dance performers. And the last video is what I call the pre-promo video for And What 2020, the festival that never happened. just to give you examples of what hasn't happened in my career. So I'll speed through this last bit. Frankly, I would never have been confident enough to take these steps without working at Arts Council, which has led me to think about skills for delivering what I do that I never realised I would actually need. That's the paperwork side of things. You don't spend 4 years of your life assessing and looking at applications without beginning to understand the budget and management plan. More importantly, though, the connectivity with artists and venues and organisations helped me realise that the creative part of my life was in need of nurture. And I could do that without being overly bureaucratic and by offering opportunities to artists and creatives on the way. I no longer had to be the artist, I could be the facilitator of it. Now I feel that I do that in two ways, as an arts administrator and a festival curator. I think maybe, hopefully, I've inadvertently responded to some of the social art network's provocations through this rambling talk, but I will do a quick review, and this bit hasn't been scripted. So, how do you navigate the responsibility of supporting fellow artists with great care? How can those of us on the inside reckon with the tools of administration to serve our peers? The tools of administration will always be difficult to reckon with, especially when some of the systems are not the best. But you know, administration is often there to serve the purposes that it needs to. So yeah, it's hard to jump through hoops always, especially as a creative, but it is part of the process in the world that we live with. And I, for one, would not want to live outside of the UK in terms of arts funding. And just one more, because I feel like I've completely overrun and I'm very apologetic about it. But how do our creative selves interact with the business side of the arts? I mean, the arts is a business. We don't live in a world where the arts is not a business anymore. And unfortunately, it's often the difficult side of things is that you have to be able to do a budget as well as think of the ideas these days. I say, God bless the producers and let's support producers more. I guess that's where I'll stop.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Great. It's really great to kind of hear your thoughts. You're clearly thinking really deeply and kind of grappling with these many different sides of your work. So thank you for sharing the videos and for just being honest and open with us there about some of your thought processes. I think there's some things in there that we can definitely pick up. Q&A for sure.
What I wanted to write in there was that I think on both sides of the fence for a long time I suffered from imposter syndrome, because when I went into Arts Council I felt like an artist, and when I'm being an artist I feel like I work for Arts Council. So that's where the therapy side of it comes in. This is free therapy, thanks. You don't have to pay any of you £50 an hour, which is great.
Thank you. Great. Okay, yeah, like I said, I think there's definitely some things in there that we can pick up in the Q&A. Lovely, thank you. I'm going to move us now to our final speaker, Sarah. Thanks so much for coming along this evening, and over to you.
Oh, the pressure of going last. So hi, thank you for having me. I'm Sarah, I'm Director of Programmes at Art Fund. For those of you that don't know what Art Fund is, it's a membership charity, it's 100 years old. And through our membership, we raise money to support museums and galleries. So we are both a membership charity and we are also a grant maker. So we're quite a kind of unusual organisational structure, and we're also very old. So we have kind of a long history and a long kind of tradition and legacy that we also kind of have to grapple with sometimes. So the first thing I wanted to say, I'm just going to share my screen before I get going. Here we go. Right, can everyone see that? And let's go to, is that going to work? Yeah, oh, but it cuts off the actually what you're looking at. So I will just have to tell you all. This will be a test for me. This is work by an artist called Melanie Mancho. It's called Dance All Night. It was part of Art Night in, I think, 2017. And it is a work that Art Fund supported. We supported the kind of commissioning process, and then it ended up entering into the collection of Arts Council collection. which is a touring collection which is shared with organisations, museums and galleries across the UK. And I'm just going to let that sit there for a little bit because I've just got some nice visuals as a bit of a prompt for some of the things that I've been thinking about. So the first thing that I want to say is I'm not an artist. I studied art history. I then went and became a fundraiser for museums and arts organisations, and actually a small live literature kind of group down in Brighton for a little bit. I then moved into the grant making side at Art Fund. So I am very much an arts administrator, which I do think can be creative, but I'm not a creative practitioner. So the second thing I want to say, leading on from that, is that after I agreed to be one of the speakers this evening and started actually thinking about what I might say, my immediate reaction was that kind of me personally and also Art Fund as an organisation, we're actually at kind of one remove most of the time from the artists and from their practice. You know, our core purpose as a funder, my job, is to support institutions, and where we come from, which is about providing money to help those institutions collect works of art, is completely directed at the object, and that is either in the context of acquisition or exhibition. We don't provide direct support, we don't have a direct relationship with the individual behind that work, quite often because that individual was alive 200 years ago. So then I was like, oh God, I'm not sure I'm going to have anything to say on this topic, and started getting a bit anxious that I'd signed up to something, and yeah, anyway. But then I kind of looked again at your questions, Gemma, and I thought a little bit more about this kind of forum as a space for some kind of really generative and quite productive questioning. And then I kind of thought again about what I do and what Art Fund does, and actually all the spaces and places that we cross paths with or benefit from artistic labour, right? Nothing we do would happen if it weren't for artists. So then I realised I actually had quite a lot I wanted to say. So I'm going to be quick. It's going to be a bit of a gallop. And maybe some of those points will be things that we want to discuss afterwards. So yeah, I thought I would run through and identify a few of those touch points and raise some questions that I have about how Art Fund as an organisation, and maybe this is applicable more generally than to Art Fund, but I'm coming at it from my own very specific experience, how through our work and our funding programmes, we can help to foster a really creative and really supportive dialogue with artists, either directly ourselves or through the institutions that we support. So as I explained before, at the heart of our work, we make grants to support the acquisition of works of art. That is our history. That's why we were founded. And in the main, what that means is we actually respond to what museums want to acquire. We're really reactive with how we work. But what's been really interesting and apparent over the last decade or so is a move in terms of the applications that we're seeing, what's coming in from a focus on mostly historic art and on the kind of the traditional art objects, to an increasing engagement with museums, by museums, or on contemporary art and contemporary practice. And often this is still object-based, but over the last few years, kind of as a funder, we have been much more frequently engaging with museum-led commissioning projects, and alongside this, having to think about a much more sort of complex and imaginative questioning of what a museum can collect. So kind of, well, you know, if I think back over the last few years as a funder, where we have heard the artist's voice much more strongly, alongside the institution's voice, it's been actually where that work has kind of been stretching the institution, and which is kind of insisting on kind of much deeper and kind of more ongoing, longer sort of months, years conversation kind of with the artist about that work and about how it's manifest. So performance, so this brilliant work by Melanie Manchot, or, oh yeah, there's a credit on that one. So Monster Chetwynd homemade tasers, which went into the collection at what was called the New Walk Gallery in Leicester, and I think has recently been renamed. So kind of performance or actually architectural intervention. So this is a work by Richard Wright at the Queen's House. And this is a whole building by Mark Wallinger on the Runnymede site. And these are kind of pieces that are, you know, in some way challenging the boundaries of the gallery space, or what a gallery is for, or what a gallery can collect, or kind of, or like literally altering the fabric of the institution. And these have been really exciting projects that have moved, I felt, have quite often moved forward the artists, moved forward the institution, and actually moved forward us as a funder. And so kind of, I think as a funder, we have a responsibility to think a bit harder about that, and to think harder about how through our funding programs and actually our application processes, that, like, you know, how can the form that we design support institutions to kind of really imaginatively and really truthfully represent the scope of artistic practice, kind of within their collections. And then also, you know, is there a way that as a funder we can help create a really constructive ongoing dialogue between the artist and the institution? You know, is that something as a funder we can insist on? How might the application encourage that? You know, how might we do that? So that's kind of something that I am kind of interested in. And then the other ways that Art Fund works with artists is kind of very similar to how a lot of charities work with artists. We ask them to be our champions, we ask them to be our supporters, and we ask them to volunteer for us, right? So here are a few examples. So this year, I hope some of you came across this. We ran a campaign to save Prospect Cottage and keep it as a site of artistic inspiration, artistic action, and kind of artistic pilgrimage. And part of our fundraising effort was through a crowdfunding site that we run for museums, which is called Art Happens. And we asked artists to donate their labour to provide the crowdfunding rewards for that campaign. And so you've got the Michael Craig Martin print there and a Jeremy Della pin badge. And actually, I'm still waiting for my Michael Craig Martin print. I know exactly where it's going to go, and it's not here yet. So that's one way that we kind of work with and we engage with artists. And we also, as kind of many other charities do, we have our own high-level patrons and donors. And we, you know, those relationships are really important, and we nurture those relationships through kind of one-of-a-kind art experiences and encounters. And unsurprisingly, I think to any of us here, one of the most popular of those kinds of events is always the visit to the artist studio, because that is where the magic happens. That's where it starts. So that's another way that we, you know, directly kind of encounter and engage with and work with artists. And then lastly, and I don't have a picture because it would have been a bit mean, but we also have artists who sit on our board of trustees. And at the moment, these are Isaac Julian and Richard Deacon. And, you know, they are hugely experienced, successful, visionary artists who volunteer their time and expertise to support our work. So I think one of the questions, Gemma, and I'm nearly done, I'm sorry, I'm sure I've run over. One of the questions that you kind of posed to help set the scene for this session was around power dynamics and collaboration between artists and institutions. And so I think this sort of example is a really interesting one. And I think that here, the artist has it in their power to shape that dynamic. So, there's an ecology here, lots of the time you hear kind of people say, oh, well, it's also about exposure for the artist and relationship building. They're also kind of being exposed to potential new patrons, potential new supporters to their work. For example, the hope is that in doing these events, that they will kind of benefit the artist's practice in the longer term as much as it benefits the institution in the immediate term. But I do think this is a slightly simplistic reading of that relationship. sometimes, and I wonder, and I'd be really interested to hear from the artists in the room, and I am not an artist. But I wonder if, and this does come directly from my experience, you know, the artists on our board, they bring this kind of incredible sort of lateral sort of thinking. They form some connective tissue between projects that, you know, I'm never going to do, right? And so I wonder whether there's an opportunity to bring that sort of creative thinking to some of these projects and some of these what are kind of quite transactional relationships. And like, so for example, you know,
we're just going to jump it. Oh, Sarah, just 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really nearly done. So, you know, so for example, with the crowdfunding, we have this brilliant pin badge that Jeremy Deller did, and that's great. And I love a pin badge as much as the next person. And that's what Jeremy wanted to do, and that's fantastic. And we're hugely grateful. But like, does it have to be like a pin badge? Could it not just be that, you know, the reward is you've got this ready-made group of volunteers for your next project. You've got this community of people that can kind of come in and do something, work with the artist in a different way, if that's what the artist wants. So I guess my ultimate question, or maybe provocation, is to what degree is it possible? And how can both the funder / institution and the artist use their very particular perspectives to turn what can be quite a transactional relationship into a more ongoing creative conversation?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sarah. That's lovely. Yeah, creative conversation. Well, that's exactly where we are now. Perfect. So interesting. Thanks to all our speakers. Just it's real mix of viewpoints there. Really different experiences. I feel like everybody is wearing different hats. I feel like we should have all just brought our hats along. Like, that's the kind of value of us all being together, is that we're all wearing many hats, whether we're creative practitioners or producers or working at institutions, working on the margins. We're all doing several things at the same time. And I hope that this is a space that we can kind of bring all those different hats. Let's open it up to the group. Yeah. Are there any questions? I definitely have a few questions, but are there questions floating around? Anyone got a question?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I definitely can ask some questions. Maybe we've got kind of 5 minutes or so for questions, and then we'll move out into our breakout sessions. I suppose I was thinking a bit about these wearing different hats, and if you are all our speakers, if you are both artists and practitioners and project managers and working and collaborating in different ways, how do you navigate that responsibility? I think, like, just to draw into that a bit more, do you have some personal rules? Do you have, I mean, we heard from Jacqueline just kind of the way that she chooses different projects, just to open that up to folks. Are there some personal rules? How do you navigate those different roles that you play? I can see Debbie's, yeah, off you go.
Well, for me, at any project when I'm about to start it, I feel that it's a project that I could do myself, or I could collaborate with one of the galleries or museums that I work with or have worked with, or I could put it out there for other people to work with. So it's often an assessment point at the earliest ideas of how passionate am I about continuing the journey. I know that Andrew mentioned about the role of producers, because actually that's the work. Making it happen is the exhausting challenge. So sometimes I want to be in all the way, and other times I just want to start it off and let other people do the work, and I'll just help it get started.
Yeah, great. Sort of knowing kind of where you've got energy and what kind of work you want to do, and that other people can pick up, or other people, there's an opportunity for others to do the second part of it or the later part.
Yeah, it's partly a good feeling about how much I want to carry it all the way through. Or sometimes I'll think of a project and think I could, but I know other people who could do it better, and I could collaborate with them and make it happen in a much bigger and better way.
Lovely. Any of our other speakers got thoughts on that, sort of your personal rules, or how you navigate and decide the different projects and the different work you're going to be doing? Andrew?
I mean, from an Arts Council point of view, obviously I have a a strict conflict of interest policy to follow whenever I work with anybody who's ever had funding from Arts Council, basically. So that can be kind of an interesting thing to navigate quite a lot, but I think it's really essential to make sure that there's no kind of nepotism in the way that I work within the sector and I work within Arts Council. But in terms of choosing projects, I always want to work with people who inspire me. And then I let them lead the project, and I will do what I can to help them realize it in terms of the festival. So if they've only ever performed in the basement of a LGBT bar before and want to take it to an actual stage with real lighting, that to me is the ultimate kind of satisfaction in terms of collaboration and supporting producing ambitions. But yeah, I constantly have to check myself that I'm not kind of overstepping the mark one way or another. And I think, you know, somebody who works in an institution, that is super and very important. Yeah.
That's great. And I just wonder about, yeah, Jacqueline, your kind of comment earlier about kind of deciding the kind of groups you work with. Has that always been the way, or that's kind of a new phase for you?
Yes, I've always decided who I want to work with, but I've always sort of follow my passion, my personal interests. You know, Caribbean elders, you know, that's me. I've got a Caribbean background. Working with young people with various issues that are relevant, you know, maybe I've experienced myself, I've lived experience of. So I very much work with organisations and that I'm in, there's a cause I'm passionate about, and likewise the artists that I choose to work with. I've got to like their art, be interested in it, and want to collaborate with them. Maybe they're exposing me to something new, a new way of thinking or a new art form. So yeah, it's got to be exciting and new to me.
That's it. I think that feels, I see some nods as we're going around. That feels like that's really true for others, just deciding, yeah, what you're passionate about, what you can give your energy to, and where you can make the most difference. Yeah, lovely. Okay, well, I see we've got a couple of questions come in. Marcelo, there's a question from you. Would you like to pose that to the speakers?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. That was really enlightening and quite varied. I think that I kind of want to preface the question it's that we are in a time where we need to rethink the conventions that have historically gotten us to this place in time. That includes the power dynamics around how we work and how we exist. And that is really incredibly present in the cultural industries. In order to move forward and progress, it requires an incredible amount of emotional labor within our practices and the institutions that we're embedded in to rethink and question. I think that's happening everywhere, and we know that. And so when I ask the question, I say it in that context. How do we really create that new relationship between artists and funders and potentially rethink these strategies of selection and distribution, which seem to really just replicate problematic power structures? This is a difficult question. I potentially don't expect you to be able to answer it, but I do want to know what are the things that we can be doing to edge ourselves closer to that risky place that maybe may make us and others uncomfortable in the workplace. But if we don't edge to those places of discomfort, how will we really reinvent ourselves socially, culturally?
Big question. Debbie's already got a hand up. Perfect.
I have a couple of thoughts. I'm not quite sure if they hit the question, but it's a similar question that I explored in my work at Quad, because Quad as a gallery shows a lot of international artists' work. And for those of us who work in public engagement, we're always getting questioned from local artists, why aren't you showing local art? You know, and then the curators say they want work that has more gravitas, possibly. It's very political, all those questions. But I always put forward that as working as an MPO, we have a responsibility to bring up the artists around us, to really hold them, support them, and to bring them with us. And I fought for this, and I got given a budget to make some of this happen, to put a call out for local artists to support them through creating a sort of business plan for their own career, to make their first funding bid, to get to explore technology. And lots of the funders that I went to would only support if they were emerging or under 30. And I just know, because so many artists, especially up north, you know, our parents are working full-time jobs and squeeze their practice in, like you were discussing earlier, Gemma, in the weekends and evenings and your lunch break. And actually, a 5-year practice can span out 20 years when you've only got lunch breaks to fit it into. So many of the people that came on it were working full-time. We ran the programme in different times when it fitted people's lives. But through that, lots of artists made their first successful funding bid for the first time at age 50, age 30, whatever point in their life. And some of them have gone to tour work internationally from that. So I honestly think that if you work at an institution that has a reach, then reach as best you can and pull people in and bring them with you. I had a tiniest budget, but what I did have was space and technology and expertise. So how do we share that?
That's lovely. And thanks so much, Debbie. And that really feels like it picks up on some of the other comments that have come through just about this moment in time. We're in Sally's comment about being in the COVID-19 moment and what that means for the whole sector. And other comments that are coming through as well. Maybe we'll just hear from Sally, and we can pick up the other questions kind of in our breakout groups afterwards. But I'm interested, Sally, do you want to just pose your question to the group?
Yeah, I want to pose this in a very messy way, actually, because I think it needs to be troubled a bit more, messed up, and that's one of the things about Sam, actually, that has been fantastic over these meetups, because I've learned a lot about being a bit messy. I think we're at a particular moment in history, actually. I've done a lot of thinking about this lately with other artists, that, you know, we've been talking tonight about collections, commissioning, but it's always about buying the artist. You know, the artist is never at the heart of making that kind of decision making. It's always about supporting them. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I do that too as an artist with other artists, Debbie, so I know where you're coming from there, and I know what that means. But we have a particular moment now, even with Arts Council funding, to turn, I think, some of that around before that funding snaps back. And I guess for me, it's a challenge as well to Art Fund to work with us in thinking about how it's not an either or situation on that funding at the moment to support artist practices, particularly when they're happening a lot of the time outside of the gallery and outside of the system, because we're living in a world that is moving and shifting, and artists are responding radically, and part of what SAM does is to support that radical practice. So it is a question that follows up from Marcelo about power. It is also about, you know, shifting the idea of business on one side and us actually looking at these practices and how we can support artists in this time. We've had years since 1994 of putting the participant totally and utterly centrally, start, middle and finish in everything that we do through the lottery funding. And it has distorted the sector, so much so that actually even Arts Council England are now worried that artists are not going to be supported to make the work. We need very different partnerships, and we need to open those conversations up big time in ways that are actually going to make us all uncomfortable, even the artists, but let's be uncomfortable.
I'm into that. Thank you, Sally. Yeah, and a really great reflection that kind of shows where we are at this moment in time. I feel like we are all kind of getting deeper into our practice and our work and interrogating what we do and why we do it. I'm going to close the Q&A in just a second, but do any of our speakers, maybe Andrew or Sarah, want to just respond to what Sally has said there, and then I'll bring it to a close.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. So the first thing to say is, like, Art Fund is not constitutionally able to support artists directly. Like, that's not, you know, our constitution, the rules of us as a charity are about supporting the museum. And actually in recent years, we have really stretched and tested those through support for organisations that don't actually have collections. So working with visual arts organisations, Kunsthalle spaces, commissioning agencies, and to try and explore as far as we feel kind of sort of we are able to, that wider ecology. I think what I was sort of trying to get at, probably slightly incoherently and possibly because I was trying to like cover too much in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however much it ended up being, was that I think we do have, now is an opportunity, and it's not just now, it's not just because of COVID, it's actually for me about how artistic practice has changed and kind of developed and grown and over the last 50 years. We have a responsibility to kind of challenge and encourage the institutions and the organisations that we work with about what it means to represent artistic practice and to work with artists in those spaces. Yeah. And so for us, in our particular context as a funder and what we are able to do, I think that's where we need to do more work, and we need to do more thinking and reflecting and listening both to artists and to kind of museums and galleries, and kind of how they want those relationships to work going forwards and what funders can do to help support those relationships.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. And that's hopefully the space that we're creating today, just some space to listen and reflect and kind of challenge each other as well. So I think we can kind of pick up on this a little bit more, but I am just going to thank everybody who is listening and watching us on YouTube. Thank you for joining us, and yeah, look forward to seeing